Hi folks, something a little different for our video today than some kind of repair or planting or doing firewood, whatever. There's an issue I'm dealing with now that I think is important that everybody who lives out in the country has to be aware of and try to manage as best we can. I'm talking about a real danger to country living, and that is property tax reassessment. My county right now is in the process of doing one. It's the first one that's been done in about, I don't know, 34 years or so. They do it every few decades. The reason that governments do this is because they want more money. They won't tell you that. They're going to say, oh, it's so everybody pays their fair share. Yeah, okay. But they want more money. And I'll tell you what the strategy is. Now, the new reassessment that's going on now, I'm not sure exactly the specifics, but I remember the last one in more detail back in 1996. The first lie that they told us was, oh, well, when properties get reassessed, about a third of them go up in value, a third of them go down in value, and a third of them stay the same. Well, that was an absolute lie. I was living in a little town nearby back then, and once the assessments were made public, they actually put books of all the properties out in the public malls so that people could examine them, look up theirs to see what it was. This is more pre-internet days, you know. And what I actually did is I found my little borough that I lived in, and I went through every single property there, which was about, I don't know, 100, 120 homes, something like that. It was a population of about 500. Very middle class, nobody with brand new homes, nobody with old decrepit rundown homes. It was just right in the middle of everything. Every single property in that borough went up. So if what they said was true, that shouldn't have been the case. For myself, here I did own the farm back then. I've owned my farm here for about 35 years. Prior to, actually, I guess it was a bit longer than the reassessment. A few years before the reassessment is when I got it. They gave me they send out a written notice with the assessment and the reassessment, and lo and behold, according to what they said, my property taxes should have quadrupled in 1 year. Absolute insanity. I finally had to hire an appraiser to come with me to a zoning board meeting to make the argument that this was out of line, and he did get it reduced, although my property taxes still tripled. Let me go back even further to tell you the other problematic things that my family's had to deal with when it comes to property tax reassessment. The time that the county did this before 1996 was in the early 1960s, so like another 30 years before, 30-some years before. And now I was a young child at the time, so I didn't know what was happening with it, and probably my family really didn't either. But when they came up with the new tax assessment maps, which are not surveys, they're just rough assessments to say this is approximately where the property is located, and it's given a serial number and all that, and then they figure out how they're going to tax you. Somebody screwed up the map that covered our family farm. They drew a 1-inch line on the map that shouldn't have been there. The property line went from west to east, and then it turned north. Well, they still found the north line, but they didn't stop the west to east line at that corner. They kept going, brought it down another, it was only about 1 inch on the map, but it was several hundred feet in the real world until it contacted the township road. This had the effect of cutting off 12.5 acres from our farm. We didn't know this had happened. We didn't know that this was going on. And it never, when they did the reassessment, they never diminished the acreage that we were paying taxes on. So how would we know unless we wanted to go look at the maps? But who did that back then, So what happened was this property sat there untaxed, quote unquote, for, I don't know, something like 10, 12 years. And then the county decided that, along with other properties that were delinquent, they would have a tax claim sale. Again, we didn't know anything about that. We were not given any notice as a potential adjacent landowner. Well, what happened is the parasitic lawyer who had bought the farm next to ours a couple years before saw this being in the courthouse, and he picked up this wonderful bargain for like $100. That resulted in a 20-year legal battle, twice through the state appellate court system in my state, until we got our land titled back. Thousands of dollars spent, all because some idiot didn't pay attention and drew an extra inch on a piece of paper that shouldn't have been drawn there. So I have no, at all, hope that reassessments are going to always be accurate in the competence of the people doing them. Forgive me for being this jaded, but that's just been my life experience with it. Now, we're doing it again in the county. Now, in '96 they did it because they were up against the ceiling. The county couldn't charge any more for taxes. There's the way they determine taxes are what they call millage rates, and each mill represents so much money percentage-wise of your property. But the state capped how high any municipality could charge millage-wise. So when our county hit that ceiling that they couldn't increase the millage on people's properties, they couldn't charge any more money. So what did they do? Well, they reassessed the properties, figuring that everybody's is going to go up, so then they could come back and say, oh, we're heroes, we dropped the millage rate. Well, yeah, even if the millage rate is dropped, if the value of the properties is quadrupled, it's still going to mean more tax money coming in. So it's a scam that's being played by governments. Whether that's exactly happening now or not, I'm not sure. Our state has a lousy legislature, shall we say, and they don't look out for country folks whatsoever. I think I've been told that they were mandated that they had to do the property tax reassessment for a county. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it would make sense to me because the state teachers union controls politics in our state, and they want more money. So we pay property taxes for the county, for our local township, and then in the fall we pay school property taxes. I haven't even seen what's going to happen with school property taxes yet. Hasn't been made public. But I have a feeling that's what's going on here, is that some people who had pull at the state capitol said, we need to reassess all these counties because we want more money to come in. And, if this is the case that it greatly improves the public schools, well, that could be an argument to be made. But our state is like 39th out of 50. So the spending more money is not the answer. It's just the bureaucrats and the politicians, because the teachers' unions all side with one political party, and they funnel money back to the candidates, and so the hand washes the hand washes the hand, But the losers are people who own property, people who are country folk usually, because we have a little bit more property than somebody who lives in a 25-foot wide or 50-foot wide lot in town. And so they want to really stick it to us because they figure it's a cash cow, even though we don't have bundles of cash laying around. The land is a tool that we use. It's not this fabulous investment as the financial people would look at it. But if you live in a country like I do, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The land is a place of peace. It's a place to work. It's a place to grow your own food, to harvest your own timber, to produce crops, perhaps raise animals, have recreation. It's something that isn't just passive, that lays there and can be written in a checkbook. It's part of who we are. But they don't care, because all they're looking for is to be greedy. Now, let's jump to where we are now. When this was announced last year, a company that was hired by our county, and I'll name names because I'm not divulging anything that isn't public knowledge. The company's name is Vision. They're from Massachusetts. They were hired by the county to come in and reassess all the properties in the county. So they had an army of quote-unquote reassessors who went out to everybody's property and measured and looked at and asked questions and so on to try to come up with an updated view of the county properties. Last year a woman showed up here. I was polite to her. I answered her questions. She took a tape measure and was measuring like the square footage or the dimensions of the buildings here, the house, the barn, the shed, etc. Took a few pictures, asked me some questions about, what kind of heat do you have, how many bathrooms do you have, etc. Those kind of general things. They do not go inside anybody's property. They're not allowed to by law. And if somebody had their property blocked off, like a fence up that they couldn't drive in, they're not allowed to go through that. What they do in a case like that is they'll use a satellite view to look down on top and try to guesstimate sizes and what buildings are, etc. It's not a very accurate way of doing things. So this woman did this, and I thought, fine. I had to talk her out of a few things. She was trying to, tax assess a chicken house, which is not even permanently in the ground, that kind of thing. So I had to explain that kind of stuff to her. So that was last year. A week or two ago, I got a letter from the county assessment office. Here is the initial assessment of your property based on the work of Vision. The number that came in, I won't go into specifics, but it is triple what this property is worth. Triple. If I were to take that number to go to any realtor within 50 miles and say, I want to sell my farm for this asking price, they'd have had me committed to an insane asylum. But these people who are coming from a rich state, a Massachusetts state, probably who live in the city somewhere and don't understand anything about the country, have come up with this bizarre number. So the remedy, according to the letter that I received, was you can set up an appointment to discuss informally with a Vision representative about what your property is worth, how it was derived, etc., blah, blah, blah. So I thought, okay, all right. So I got my ducks in a row, I got my information in a row. Without being too personal or what have you here, I'll just say that over the past 30 years I have greatly reduced the size of this farm. It's dozens of acres smaller than it was in 1996. So that means that you're comparing apples and oranges in the value, because there was much more of it to tax back then than there is now. The other thing is the buildings are more in disrepair. I've shown you some of that with some of the work that we're doing. And also the thing that the land that I've sold off was the most valuable land of the property because it was road frontage land that people could build homes on, etc. The residue that's now left is what I wanted, but it's not commercial, or not commercially, not real estate wise as anywhere near as valuable, but it's what I want. We've got several acres of woods where I can continue to select cut trees every 15-20 years and have some income from that, get all the firewood I need. Also in that the acre, I don't know if it's 60-70 acres, I don't know of that. There are lots and lots of streams, small little streams and things. It's fairly wet, so you couldn't build on that anyhow because you could never get percolation testing done for on-lot sewage systems because the ground is too wet. And that's okay. The land that I had sold off wasn't like that, so it was doable. But and there's no sewer treatment plant that could be hooked up. We're out in the country. Everybody has their own septic system, and I know I've done a video on that before here about ours here. The other component of this is there's about maybe 35-40 acres of farmland left. It's not the greatest farmland. The fields are small. In the 1800s, it was as much farm as any family could manage, but today it's not a commercially viable farm. I mean, I have the fields leased out to local farmers. It's, you know, a very small part of their operation, but you couldn't earn a living from it. So it's not like buying, you know, Midwest 1,000-acre farms. You know, it's not like that. It's not worth that. And the third thing is that, and I've shown you this in a video recently, the bottom part of the farm, we sit in the bottom of the valley, is where this dead creek flows, a creek that's been polluted because of 150 years of coal mining. It was killed. So the land, about 50 acres, about a third perhaps of this farm, sits in a floodplain. So it can't be developed. You can't build in a floodplain. You can't, you know, the hoops you have to try to jump through to even claim that you want to put up a building of some sort in a floodplain are just astronomical. Nobody would buy it. On top of that, the land around the stream, all in the floodplain, is completely covered with fine coal silt from 150 years of coal mining. The coal processing plants, what they called coal breakers, upstream washed their refuse out of the breaker and into the stream. Back in the 1800s, early 1900s, there were no environmental regulations, so they did it. So what we've got here, and this stream flows, I don't know if it's about 50 miles to a major river, all along the banks is covered with this coal silt. So it is not any agricultural land anymore, any beneficial agriculture. Before the coal mining interfered and polluted, this was probably the bottom land here on the farm because it was the most fertile, it was closest to the water, etc. But now it's completely worthless. Nothing grows well there. Now there are some trees that grow on there, but they don't do well. They don't grow fast. Many die before they get to be any kind of size because the soil is lousy. It's very acidic. The only thing that tends to grow well there are white birch trees, but they don't even get to a large size either. They all die off when they get to be so big. And there's other, you know, scraggly grasses and things like that. It's nothing that you could use to farm or have orchards or have any other kind of agricultural operation. And on the other hand, as well, you wouldn't build a house with that kind of lawn, with that kind of soil. It has no mining value either. I had tried back in the 1980s and 1990s to have a surface coal operator, somebody who scrapes up this stuff and was selling it to various low-grade coal processing operations. The problem is, since this was stuff that washed here, it is mixed with sand from the stream. So it's a very, very low quality. It doesn't burn well. In fact, the guy who tried to take some of the coal out of here, what he would do is, or the silt I should say, and that wasn't chunks, it was silt. What he would do is he would take his loads from my place, get some higher grade stuff from somewhere else, mix it together and sell a medium grade product. I mean, some of these coal breaker operations, they had huge calm banks because they would store their material that they couldn't really use but didn't know what else to do with. So that stuff was much purer in quality because it had less debris in it, less sand in, less problems as far as trying to burn it. So that's the only way he could move even any of my coal silt. And he tried for, I don't know, 10, 15 years, and finally he just gave up on it. It wasn't worth it. So what's remaining here, however many tons still may be here on my property, I mean there certainly is more upstream and downstream, has very little value of any kind. So to tax this, you're going to say there's 50 acres of land here that has no value. How can you tax it? Now granted there's some wildlife there, and I do like seeing that, of course, but wildlife is adaptable, but it's not a game preserve, it's not state game lands or a federal forest or anything like that. It's not nowhere near that quality. It could never be that. So what am I going to do? Well, I went to this meeting. I forget the guy's name, I won't mention it in the video anyhow. 20-something with a man bun. I'm thinking I know what I'm in for. Forgive me for prejudging someone, but you know, when you live out in the country, you can kind of assess people based on how they present themselves. You know, they're just, that's just the way it is. So I brought all my information, went there. I was ready to argue that, you know, that this assessment number was insane, and here's why. And I had a lot of stuff written out. Well, the only thing he wanted to do in this meeting, he said, the only reason that we're having this meeting is so I can confirm the numbers that the field assessor and the information that the field assessor reported. Was the blueprint of the footprint of the house and the barn, whatever, are those distances accurate? The other outbuildings and so on, are they described accurately in the, you know, in the report that was, that really part of it's already on file with the county from previous years. You know, if you have a 100-year-old shed, it's not going to suddenly become a different size, you know, as far as that goes. So that's what we did. And then he said, I have no excuse me, I have no idea how they came up with this assessment number. I don't have that information, and I can't help you with that. And I said, well, why am I having this meeting with you if it was just to go over a couple little things here to confirm or deny that your field person did their job right? Well, I don't know. And I said, well, how do I need to talk to the person who came up with the valuation and find out what their rationale was, what their strategy was, what their formula was, so that I can see whether it's valid or not. Again, these are people from out of state. How do they know what coal lands are worth when they're from Massachusetts? How do they know what a floodplain area is worth with a dead stream if they're from Massachusetts? You can't just plug in a number. It's in some book somewhere that says, okay, X number of acres, if it's flat, it's worth this much. If it's forested, it's worth this much. It doesn't work that way. Not in the real world, not with real realtors. Like I said, if I were to take this number that they gave me and try to sell this place, which I'm not looking to, of course, it would never sell. The realtor would just, first of all, he wouldn't take the contract. And then even then, if he asked for half of that, he'd still have to work it down to a much more reasonable number before there'd be anybody interested. I know this. I've sold a lot of land off over the years. I know how it works. A lot of it I did myself, but I did work with some realtors, so I understand that. But these people just have no clue. But they are determined that they are going to stick it to us country people because we have a little bit more. You know, it's got to be worth as much as, let's say, the 10 acres that a major company distribution center has put their, you know, put their company onto on a, you know, an industrial park. No, it doesn't work that way at all. But I'm warning people with saying this because they're going to come for you too. I don't care where you live. Government likes money. People in government stay there because they spend money to buy votes. They're not the people's advocate, no matter how much they tell you they are. Now, I'm not against government, don't get me wrong, and we need government services, don't get me wrong. We need to have law enforcement, we need to have safety, we need to have good roads and fire and ambulance services. All those things are important that government does. But what we are supposed to pay for out in the country is for the lousy lifestyles that the people in the city live. We're supposed to pay for the welfare and the drug addicts and the Medicaid scammers, I'll use a correct term for YouTube, the newcomers and other people are sucking from the rest of us that these people, even in the local municipal governments, have to put in their budgets. Has nothing to do with benefiting us. And it really doesn't have anything to do with benefiting them. It makes them dependent on government, so they'll keep voting these people back into office over and over again. You know, this is the tragedy with this infestation, with this Marxism in this country that's been here for well over a half a century. It has made people more and more dependent on government and less independent, less and less free. People who lived in the country 100 years ago were revered by the townspeople because the country people provided them with food. Not just, you know, the grain for bread and things like that, but you had dairy farms brought milk to the town. There used to be these milk trucks that would drive out from these major dairies that they would, you remember some of the stories perhaps, the little glass bottles they put on the porch or in the little aluminum boxes on the porch where, you know, they would get their milk supply. There were root butchers that would travel with their butcher trucks with whatever meat that they had butchered that day or whatever, and people would, they had regular stops. They knew the customers who wanted to buy from them. People didn't even have to go to the store. This is before there was DoorDash. They didn't have to go to the store to get their groceries. It would come to them. Same thing with vegetables and fruit. A lot of little towns had their own little open-air farmers market one day a week during growing season. Didn't have to go anywhere to find your food. Just walk downtown. It was all on display. It was freshly picked. Came locally from just, you know, a few miles out of town perhaps. You knew you were getting good quality food. You got to know the people. They got to know you. That's what made America great, because people shared with each other in that regard. Now we've stuck this huge middleman in between who says, I'm going to take from you and I'll give a small portion of it to somebody else and I'll keep the rest, and they're sucking the life out of country folk. This needs to stop. And one of the ways they're trying to do this now, where I live, is this reassessment. They'll never tell you that, and there'll be a lot of people make excuses why this is so necessary that it has to happen, but they all fall flat when they're really pressed. They're looking for more money. They want to be able to spend more money, and they want to take it out of my pockets and your pockets to do it. And if they don't think that you can support this much land, well then, the heck with it. Sell it, get rid of it, put it up for tax sale, let some, you know, sleazy rich lawyer buy it. That's their mindset. So how do we stop it? Well, I'm going to do what I can. There will be a more formal hearing coming up, I'm sure. Hopefully, instead of these Massachusetts people, I'll be talking to the local zoning board, people who actually live in my county, and try to make the argument to them that this number that they put on this piece of paper is insane, and could we come up with something far more reasonable, something that they should understand better living here, knowing what dead streams and floodplains and coal lands and, you know, wet lands that are too wet to build on, how they are diminished in value as far as a real estate perspective is. And so therefore they shouldn't be tax assessed at these astronomical rates. Hopefully that will work, but it's going to take time and energy. I may end up even having to hire an appraiser to get a new appraisal done, which is not cheap, and then let them make the argument that their numbers are insane. But remember, these companies like Vision, they make their money from making money for the local governments. the deck is already stacked against us. They're not there to be honest and fair. They're there to try to see how much more money they can get for the local governments. Because if they are successful with that, then hopefully another municipality will hire them to do the same thing and they can continue growing their company. It's a parasitic kind of existence that they have. It's not about paying your fair share. It's about them wanting to make sure that they squeeze as much money out of us as they can. They'd never tell you that. And some may be honest in trying to do it, but that's the end result. So I think the best thing that we can do to try to fight back is band together as country folk to say, this is not going to happen to us. We're going to live the lifestyle we want to live on land that our ancestors paid taxes on for well over a century. You're not going to steal it from us just because you want to, feed some able-bodied man who wants to sit on his couch and play video games all day long in some apartment somewhere. That's obscene. But at any rate, that's what we've got to do, is stick together. We've got to keep the pressure on our state legislators to be more equitable about this. We've got to carve out niches for those who own land that is not developable or in high demand for residential communities, especially good farmland. Farmers shouldn't be stuck with these incredible bills. Oh, they have some programs out there, but they're scams. They have this one program, it's called Clean and Green, where, well, we'll cut your property taxes in half, but you have to agree to these restrictions. Well, the restrictions are you can't ever sell any of your land off. You can't. I couldn't do that here, even though I don't want to sell any more land off, because there's a restriction on how much timbering can be done. You can't do more than 10 acres at a time. Well, if I was clear cutting, that would be one thing, but I've never clear cut because that's not good for forests. Select cut takes the mature trees out so that the smaller growth can grow up healthy. That's the best way to preserve forests. Clean out the disease, the dead, and the mature stuff. The people who don't even bother, they want these huge big trees, those things just rot and die. The sawmills don't want them because they're too big for the equipment. There's a certain size that's best for the use for lumber, trees being turned into lumber. That's the smart way to do it, but that's not what they want. But I would have to follow that stupid rule if I wanted to get that tax break. And oh, by the way, if you put it into this program and then at some point down the road take it out, you have to pay back like 8-10 years worth of the tax difference that you didn't pay while you were in it, and also another, I think it was like 8% penalty on top of that. So it's a scam to get the government money, because these politicians know, well, eventually this will go out of Clean and Green and we'll recoup everything we didn't get from down the road somewhere. This is nuts. Let the people who live in the country, who know how to manage their land, and stop trying to micromanage it from some state legislature somewhere, from some 8th floor apartment in a city somewhere. Let the people who can be productive, and that's what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to do with this site. Country living on a shoestring. Obviously, I'm not wealthy by any means, nor do I worry about trying to become hugely wealthy. I just want to be left alone, have enough to take care of myself and my family, and live a lifestyle that is close to nature, that I can enjoy God's creation, but I can also have good quality food. I can have plenty of heat in the wintertime, and I can enjoy beautiful sunsets or beautiful snowstorms, or gentle rain, and all the other benefits that all of you know about if you live out in the country. But we have to stop these parasitic governments from stealing what doesn't belong to them. So yes, watch out for anybody talking about property tax reassessments, because they're out to steal your money, even though they'll never tell you that. So feel free to include some comments for this video. Thank you for watching, and I know I went long here, but it's important, and I wanted you to understand where I'm coming from, and we'll continue to live out in the country on a shoestring to have the kind of freedom and the lifestyle that we as Americans deserve to have if we want it. Thank you again.